Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus with a quick deck tech before we get rolling on a replay. So I apologize in advance, this video will be a replay instead of a live gameplay and commentary. A couple things fit into this. When I was playing this league, there was a lightning storm floating around, plus we also have a new addition to the family, a 2-year-old collie dog that is very needy, so it does make it difficult sometimes to predict when I'm going to get interrupted, and I prefer to be as uninterrupted as possible. That said, if you like what you're seeing on the channel, please consider subscribing, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below. I want to thank our newest Patreon, Jordan Wood. If you want to if you'd like to support the channel and get a sideboard guide to the latest version of Boros or whatever Vern I'm playing at the time, feel free to sign up for our Patreon for as low as $1 a month. You'll get a twice a month updated strategy guide. With a deck that I would play most of the time, not necessarily each little iteration that we play on stream, but, general strategy guide for, top 10, 12 matchups of the format at that particular time. And if you would like another way to support the channel and you happen to shop on Amazon a lot, there's a link down below to go search out Magic cards, and it helps support the channel if you buy through that link. And anyways, getting into this build of Boros, difference is we're running 4 light up the stage in the main deck, and Eidolon of the Great Revel has been moved to the sideboard. So, a couple reasons for this. I wanted to run a little bit lower land count this time around. Also, someone requested that we run light up the stage, but they requested we remove Riftbolt. My solution to the problem was to move Eidolon to the sideboard. Riftbolt, while it doesn't play well with Light Up the Stage itself, in terms of casting things off of Light Up the Stage, it does play nicely to enable Spectacle for both Light Up the Stage and Skewer. So I moved Eidolon to the sideboard, because I've noticed in a lot of matchups I find myself boarding it out, or it's only kind of so-so. Beyond that, running the full 4 Lightning Helix whenever we're playing the 4 Sunbaked Canyon, just feel it's kind of necessary that if you're going to play with a lot of life loss between your fetch lands and your Sunbaked Canyons, that you want some way to recoup your life loss. And we're running a second copy of Grim Lavamancer, kind of helping the creature matchups like humans and such. Also gives us another 1-drop to pair with our Spectacle cards. Sideboard, there was one big faux pas on my... When I noticed whenever I made this list is there's no artifact or enchantment destruction, no Smash to Smithereens, no Wear Tears, and it almost came back to bite us against the Chalice of the Void deck in this league. Beyond that, 4 copies of Graveyard Hate between Grafdigger's Cage and Rest in Peace for the Hagok Bridgevine decks running around. 2 Skull Cracks here for some life gain. Also another spell to bring in when you're boarding out things like Searing Blood. 2 copies of Searing Blood when we're facing against creature decks, things like humans, things like Infect and such. And 4 Path to Exile, once again, primarily because of the humans matchup, but we've gone back up to 4. This is a card I'll bring in some numbers against things like Tron, against things like humans and such. So this is a number that varies between 2 and 4, depending on how much, usually pretty much on how much humans is running around in the meta right now. No Exquisite Firecraft in this build, no copies of Cindervines, so we're a little bit more vulnerable to things like Is It Phoenix, but I think this is a nice trade-off and a pretty well-balanced thing when trying to run Light Up the Stage in the main deck. Anyways, let's get into some matches and see how this deck does. Back for match number 1, game number 1 in this league. So first hand, pretty good. This is one of the hands you're looking up for Light Up the Stage. 2 1-drops, so they have to be able to deal with both your 1-drops and shut off your Light Up the Stage. A couple Boros Charms to follow up, so generally this hand's pretty good. Lead on basic Mountain here. Not quite as relevant when your opponent is not, or when you no longer have Inspiring Advantages in your play to fetching that. Probably just would have been better to shock in Sacred Foundry, but thinning our deck is not terribly irrelevant either. So go ahead and play out our Swift Spear. Obviously our opponent is on Blue-White Control, which is a pretty reasonable matchup. I think it's one of the matchups that I've lost the fewest matchups to. I think I have one of the few decks that I have like a 90+% win rate against. It's kind of insane. Use Boros Charm here, maximize our damage. Don't have any basics left to fetch because we happen to hit all 3 of our basics. Opponent plays Wall of Omens. We just kind of put them to 1 here. Then they have to be able to deal with 2 creatures and Unknown Lightning Helix plus a Riftbolt. Pretty easy matchup overall. First, go to game 2. As far as sideboarding, I'm pretty sure we can look at the sideboard cards that we do in this matchup before we get into game 2. Boarded out the Searing Blazes. Also boarded out a Rift Bolt, and yeah, it looks like it was just the Searing Blazes and the Rift Bolt for the 3 Eidolons and the 2 Skullcracks. So, not really missing Exquisite Firecraft in this particular matchup. Firecraft's a little bit better against like Jeskai and such. Suspending a Rift Bolt here. So I'm talking about Rift Bolt being better at setting up Spectacle spells. Opponent didn't counter with a Mana Leak, so I'm presuming they don't have anything, or it's like a Logic Knot. They play it Teferi. Just play everything at sorcery speed here, put them to 4. Play a Swift Spear. They play Resto Angel to block, which is fine, and then we Boros Charm them to death. Pretty simple blue-white control, as long as you have reasonable draw. They're kind of clunky a little bit. They struggle with multiple 1-drop haste creatures. Blue-white control can be set up to beat Boros Burn, or any type of burn if it wants to, with things like timely reinforcements and such, but I think these Planeswalker heavy builds, much like the ones in Standard, tend to struggle against mono red or red aggressive variants featuring the 2 angles of attack of creatures plus burn spells, unless they're specifically built with, you know, in Standard's case, it's card like Moment of Craving, Enter the God Eternals, basically a bunch of stuff that just goes over the top and gains a bunch of life. Blue-white control in Modern can't afford to play that many hate cards for something like Burn. If it wanted to beat Burn, it would need to play like a combination of like Leyline of Sanctities and Timely Reinforcements, in addition to running enough creature removal to blunt Burn's creature assault, things like Path Exile, Oust, etc. Blue-white really can't leverage. It doesn't have enough removal spells to kill the creatures 1-for-1, and then it, you know, has to tap out for a Planeswalker to win at some point, which gives you a window to play a bunch of burn spells, you know, hit them for 7 to 10 damage over the course of the turn they tap out, and then the turn you untap, which is usually the strategy you kind of want to set up when you're trying to kill the control decks. But anyways, off to a pretty quick start in the league here. Get down to match number 2. Hey everybody, we're back for match number 2. Don't forget to check out our Discord page, which is linked down below here. So we'll be on the play here for match number 2, which is obviously a nice start. Hand's pretty solid. The one thing, like when you're evaluating a burn hand, burn hands that have a 1-drop creature, especially on the play, tends to be the fastest. The hand, that said, you know, we have Rift Bolt on 1 into Lava Spike, Rift Bolt, so a lot of early plays here. Just go ahead and suspend Rift Bolt, pass. When it plays a turn 1 Ensnaring Bridge, they're obviously mono red Prison, which Bridge is not very effective against what our particular draw is doing. Play Swift Spear, get the Boros Charm out of our hand. They're kind of stuck on lands, can't get cards out of their hand fast enough. They play a Chalice on 1. We do this, we do the Boros Charm thing. So, Mono Red Prison is one of those decks that, much like a Leyline Enchantment Prison deck, which we'll be playing probably later today, which is a donation deck list from Foz. If you want a donation deck list, there are links. There's a link on the main YouTube channel to do a donation deck list, and also the website, which will be coming out. I'll be introducing later today. We'll also have a donation link that you can donate to see decks played. But the thing with this deck is Chalice on 1 on turn 1 can be broken. In certain cases, Blood Moon can be a problem, but Ensnaring Bridge really isn't an issue. This is also the matchup where the lack of Smash to Smithereens came back to bite us a little bit, which we'll get into here in game number 2. So, sideboarding in this matchup, pretty simple for the most part. Get the Searing Blazes out of your deck, get other spells into your deck. So, Searing Blazes out, 1 copy of Lavamancer out, get our 3 Eidolons and 2 Skullcracks in. They're not likely to have a lot of life gain, but shaving on 1-drops is not terrible. That said, this isn't the hand I can throw back, but we do get locked out by a Chalice on 1, and that's pretty much exactly what happens. So, I have no Smash to Smithereens in my deck, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 dead cards in my hand. And sure, I can play Riftbolt, hope to rip a land, and maybe play a game from there. But the fact that, you know, our entire hand got blanked by our turn 1 play without being able to leverage any of our 1-drops, kind of might have been too early to scoop because their deck doesn't have a very fast clock. But I knew this was a game I'm probably 95% to lose at that point, so game 3. These matches tend to be very one-sided one way or the other. They either have their hate card that matters or they don't. This hand doesn't get locked out by Chalice. We do need another land to operate, most likely, but still a pretty solid hand, especially when you have a bunch of 1-mana plays, and you have creatures you can start to leverage. You know, even though we miss our land drops, they play a Chalice, but they're taking a bunch of damage in the meantime. Go ahead and skewer them. They play a Chandra and abrade one of our dudes. Get in here for some damage. Play layup stage, final land. Play Skewer the Critics, they kill that. Play Blood Moon, we play Eidolon, they can't afford to play Anger of the Gods, and now they're dead. So, one thing about the Pyro Prison decks, and Joshua Unthank can kind of attest to this, is especially without the London Mulligan rule, they're extremely vulnerable to mulligans. Like this game, one of these games they mulligan to 4, and they just really didn't get to play Magic. They're kind of a clunky deck. They're relying on their lock pieces to kind of win the game, and if they don't hit their lock pieces, then Burn can just kind of run them over. In the games where they find that fast Chalice on 1, or if they happen to have Leyline Sanctity in their sideboard, or Witchbane Orb, any of those kind of stuff, and they can get to him pretty quickly, makes Burns' life a lot more difficult. I think they have more game against the field than something like Mono White Prison. However, they are more vulnerable to not finding their cards. So, this is another fairly easy win, but an oversight of Smash to Smithereens not being in the sideboard could have potentially cost us this matchup. Anyways, we'll be back in a bit here with match number 3. Here we are, back for match number 3. Pretty solid hand here with Goblin Guide and Lay Up the Stage. Do have 2 currently uncastable red cards, which can be concerning, and Searing Blaze is a potentially dead card, but we do have 3 draws, 4 draws to start hitting either white sources or something relevant with Goblin Guide. Being able to trigger Lay Up the Stage, presumably on turn 2. It's pretty much about it for evaluating this opening hand. Double Mountain's a little weird. Had a lot of drawing all of our basic kind of hands. Opponent plays that. We draw our 3rd basic, which is really weird. So at this point I'm thinking we're facing some style of green-black deck, and then they fetch a Breeding Pool. Here comes Blighted Agents. Always get their creatures off the board if you can. Here we also prioritize. So here I cast Light Up the Stage, see if we can draw out a copy of Spell Pierce. We do not. Use the sorcery speed thing here to target this first, force them to crack this. Now, granted, this all could go to the face, but with some of these decks using scale up and such, it's just too risky to let them untap with Blighted Agent. And we bolt in response. I could potentially have had them use a protection spell there. And then Lay Up the Stage, we go ahead and do that, because we can't actually kill them this turn anyway. So, and then untap, we have Riftbolt minimum in hand. So, In fact, I generally think is a fine matchup. I think the last time around we lost because they had the turn 3 kill on the play or the draw, one of the two. They had scale up in the stuff. Sideboarding, I didn't bring in the Eidolons, especially on the draw. They're not quite as good. Could potentially bring in Skull Cracks if you think they have some type of life gain. For now, just 4 Boros Charms and a Light Up the Stage and a Rift Bolt for 4 copies of Path and 2 Searing Bloods. So this game stands solid, but we are kind of choked on mana. They present a threat immediately. Play out Lavamancer, they chunk in. Play another threat. We just don't have the ability to kill anything here. Go ahead and block, force them to use a pump spell. Once again, we kind of get choked on mana. Lay up the stage, they have a Spell Pierce. It's kind of a desperation play. Perhaps I'm just supposed to try to interact 1-for-1 here. Go ahead and kill their dude. This is one of those cases that, yeah, I could held back Lavamancer to block potentially, but they'll just turn around and use the whatever creature I don't block with. They can just go for the kill with Become Immense. That's the one thing, is if you get choked on mana, you have to be able to deploy your spells to beat Infect. So that was obviously a problem. Game number 3 was an interesting one. Key with them is just keep their creatures off the board if at all possible. This hand's got a Lavamancer, it's got a couple lands, it's got pieces of interaction. So as we're having the second Lavamancer in the main deck's kind of nice. They play out that. Play right into a Searing Blaze. I don't know that our, especially with the Spellskate, I don't know that our opponent was playing the best game plan they could possibly do. Yeah, sure. So using the Lightning Bolt more as a deterrent to keep them from using pump spells and anything. Especially since we already have a bolt in hand. They obviously thought we were bolting their guy. They didn't really check the targets. Show a couple Lightning Helixes. They animate. Just keeping us from killing with Pyromancer, which is fine. Just bolt their face, untap and kill them. So, in fact, most of the creature matchups used to be fairly reasonable matchups for Burn. Between pass, all these bolt effects and such. It's only really, like, humans. I think humans is like the one creature matchup that is the most tricky simply because they have ways to tax your things in addition to spells to protect their things. Like, they have Thalia, they have, things like Thalia, the new Mariner if they want to play it. So they have ways to tax your things, and they can put on a click clock, whereas decks like Infact, decks like Spant, Spirits, decks like Infact, decks like Devoted Druid, unless you like stumble or have some type of awkward don't interact with creatures draw, or you flood out, generally speaking, you're in pretty good shape against their against most of their reasonable draws. That's one reason to play Burn. I think between the combination of Paths, Searing Bloods, Searing Blazes, Deflecting Palms, most of the creature-based aggro and combo matchups are usually pretty decent other than humans. And I think humans is closer than I initially gave it thought with all the copies of Auriok Champion running around. It's actually a matchup we'll play later in the league, but matchup still feels pretty close, so maybe I went a little overboard, but I still think having 3 to 4 Path on the sideboard was pretty nice with humans. The last major event, at least, was on the uptick before the printing of Modern Horizons. Anyways, we'll be back here in a bit with match number 4. Hey, we're back for match number 4 in this league. 3-0 start so far, pretty solid. So, see what this game holds. We're on the play. No creatures. Bunch of burn spells, so we can deploy our spells. We got 2 lands, so pretty solid keep overall. Pretty happy to keep this hand in most matchups. So once again, probably should have left lead on Bloodstained Mire, but we're probably going to have to shock in this Sacred Foundry anyway, so suspend the Rift Bolt and pass. It goes turn 1 Goblin Guide, so it's the mirror match. Get a land on top. So Helix their creature, get the pressure off the board. Here comes the Goblin Guide. Reveals a Grim Lavamancer. Not the best thing in the mirror match to have a Lavamancer, because that kind of gives them a blaze target, but let's get it out there. Go ahead. They blaze it. We fetched there, so in case we had a land on the top of our deck, it would clear it off, since we're going to plan on bolting this anyway this turn. We're behind on both cards and life here. So our opponent has 3 cards in hand, we're at 10 life, so and we keep drawing more lands, then they just kind of go off and kill us here. Sometimes that's what happens in the mirror match, especially when you don't have an early 1-drop creature like Monastery Swiftspear or Goblin Guide to kind of pressure them, get in a hit or two before they have to use a burn spell on it. So like a Goblin Guide there would have either forced them to like use a Rift Bolt, or you know, if they played Goblin God, they would have taken a hit for 4 damage. So when I keep talking about the big key to burn, it's always the 1-drop creatures, especially at least in Modern. Probably similarly in Legacy. 1-drop creatures are kind of the thing that gets the ball rolling. Oftentimes they get in for more damage than spells, but in the mirror match, especially on the draw, it can actually be a liability. So, get into game number 2. So this version is slightly different than what was in the sideboard guide, so how we board for the mirror match is a little bit different. Boarded, obviously the Eidolons aren't in our deck, so I boarded out a couple copies of Light Up the Stage and a couple copies of Rift Bolt for 2 copies of Path to Exile and 2 copies of Searing Blood. So you board in Path in case your opponent has Core Firewalker. You board in Searing Blood because 2-for-1s are good in these matchups. Sand's pretty good. Got some 1-drops, got a Lightning Helix, got some ways to interact with creatures. Unfortunately, do we have to fetch Shock to kind of get the ball rolling here. To show a Goblin Guide, so we're going to get guided on one. Hope they just bolt our guy. And we're kind of stuck on lands. Kind of hold up Bolt here, try to kill their dude. They have the triple 1-drop start, and so this concession is very early. I'm not going to sit here and say it's not. The problem we have here is we bolt this dude, that's fine. We're taking 2, and then we would need to like hit runner on lands to get back into the game. So yeah, it's probably early to concede, especially with the Lightning Helix in our hand. Bolt here, Helix there. We go to this would put us to 13. That put us back up to 16 with a handful of spells. Maybe it was early to concede here, but it just felt like we were too far behind with a triple 1-drop start and missing on land drops. So early concession on my part. Not the easiest thing to do, but we were very far behind here, missing land drops. Had a Bolt to kill this, had a Helix to kill one of these potentially if we actually draw a land. If we end up missing on a land drop, we're so far behind this game that you know we can suspend the Rift Bolt and we're taking probably a minimum of 4. So best case scenario, we rip a land, say it's a mountain. We Helix this, go to 16. They untap, play a spell or 2, hit us. So maybe they run out of gas, but I do think I think at this point we're too far behind, and that's why I conceded. But probably a premature scoop. Probably should have waited to see at least one more turn if I drew a land. So you know, maybe when I was 3-0, I was playing a little bit fast and loose. Mistake there. There was another mistake in our last match. We'll get to here in 1 second. Here we are for match number 5 here in this league with a Light Up the Stage build of Boros. This hand's pretty solid. We do have 3 lands and 2 Light Up the Stages, which is a little bit clunky. If this were a standard hand, I'd be very happy to see, like, you know, turn 1, G2 Lava Runner into Light Up the Stages. But this hand's a little bit on the, like, dirtle side for burn in Modern, so we'll see if that comes back to bite us. So a Spear, get in some damage. Opponent goes turn 1, Ether Vial, Human. So we go Lightning Bolt, drew our third copy of the Lay Up the Stage, the Searing Blaze. Opponent good does their thing, they play a Thalia. We untap, we play a land, we Searing Blaze their dude, get them to 10. They start deploying stuff. Kitesail Freebooter, not terribly relevant. Monster Swift Spear. Their hand's a bunch of dirtle dudes. We kill that, get in for some damage, put them to, they leave 8, play a Swift Spear post-combat. Play Reflector Mage, and now the Human's deck starts doing its thing. They have Mantis Rider, pressuring us for 4. Play a Lay Up the Stage. That's where I commented the Lay Up the Stages could be a little bit clunky here. They hit us down to 7. So, important to note, this next turn sequence is where things get a little goofy. So I can Helix their face to set up Spectacle for that, kill that. So we're at 8 life now, and they only have 7 power on board, and they have no cards in hand, so they need to draw something, either another haste threat, a Thalia's Lieutenant or something, so, or another Phantasmal Image. So I cast Lay Up the Stage, see Lava Spike and concede, because I'm like, I can't kill them, but they were 1 point short of lethal on the crackback. So, second game where a premature concession, you need to do the math and confirm you're dead before conceding. That Lightning Helix and killing their creature was just enough to buy us potentially another turn. Should have put this play into play tapped, and then these 2 spells alone would have been enough to kill them on the backswing. My opponent was actually kind enough to mention that, and after the game was like, yeah, you weren't dead that turn. So that ends up costing the match as we win game number 2. As far as sideboarding, board out the Boros Charms, board up a couple Light Up the Stages. Probably should have boarded in Skull Cracks, ended up boarding in the 4 Path to Exile and 2 copies of Searing Blood. So, reason you don't like Eidolon in this matchup is Eidolon is a liability against Ether Vial decks. So, here comes that guy. Do the thing, hit them for a bunch of damage. They have a bunch of lands, but still, you generally want to kill their creature. So, suspend the Riftbolt, kill their dude. They play a Thalia, sure. This is where maybe we have too many Path to Exiles in our hand, but being able to tempo out your opponent here is pretty important. It's possible I'm supposed to use a Path there, but I really don't like giving them extra mana. So Mantis Rider, sure. Play a Thalia's Lieutenant. Hit us for 4. We do the Path thing. When I talk about tempo with Burn, this is the kind of games I'm talking about. Using Path to Exile to leverage your dudes, get in as much damage as you can, and then Burn spells kind of allow you to finish off the game. And these are the concerns when you're playing the Horizon lands, right? So you want to deploy your spells, but like this, them taking extra damage to cast this Mantis Rider is going to end up killing them, because we drew a land, and then it's where the extra copies of Helix allow you to be able to cast your extra bolts and such. This is relevant. I do think 4, especially when you're running 4 Lightning Helix, is perfectly reasonable. Some people are running 6. Like, I think the latest 5.0 list was running 6 Horizon Canopy lands. It was running 2 Fiery Islet in addition to 4 Sunbaked Canyon. That might be a little overkill, but honestly, we'll have to test to kind of find out. And then game number 3. This inevitably happens sometimes in the humans matchup. What's about to happen to us? This hand, so I do believe I end up mulliganing this hand. Hand's solid, but all we're doing with it is answering creatures. We're not pressuring our opponent at all. We have no Grim Lavamancers. We have no 1-drops. Have one more land than we ideally want in our opener, so I think I end up pitching this hand into... This hand's pretty reasonable. If you're able to leverage these Swift Spears, do only really have one source of deal with creature stuff, but that's fine. Start pressuring them, get our guys on the board. They do the lieutenant thing. Do this. Do this to set up lay up the stage. It's possible I'm supposed to use path there to... I guess I didn't use lay up the stage, I used skewer the critics. It's possible I'm supposed to use path there, but once again, I don't want to accelerate them in the early games to allow them to double spell quicker. It ends up being fine here because Deputy would have been a problematic card to deal with. Go ahead, we path that, get our guys back, play a bunch of spells, hit 2 lands, down to 7. Looking like we have a decent chance here. And then Humans does the human thing. Let's hold this back. It's possible I should have, like, bolted that and attacked in, forced them to respond. Because Lieutenant's going to grow. Reflector Mage our guys. Now I have a handful of Swift Spears that I can't cast, and they're just applying pressure. This is Humans doing the Humans thing. It's possible, like I said, that one turn cycle I'm just supposed to bolt and attack in, bolt the Reflector Mage attack in, or bolt Reflector Mage as they're playing Phantasmal Image. Maybe I'm supposed to bolt Reflector Mage. But then they just turn around and copy Thalia's Lieutenant, and I think we're in just as much trouble. But I do think it's possible I made a couple miscues there, like especially game 1 where I obviously missed them, them having to top deck Athalia's Lieutenant or another Manus Rider or Phantasmal Image to kind of kill us, And then this game, I should have bolted the Reflector Mage in response to Phantasmal Image coming down. This would have allowed us to deploy a bunch of chump blockers this turn. Potentially turn the game around if we'd drawn a burn spell or 2 with them only being at 6 life. So everyone says burn doesn't require skill or doesn't require any type of that. Burn is something that paying attention to the little things on the key turns is an extremely important endeavor. So I think this build was solid. I think I would run it back, not necessarily card for card, but I think cutting the Eidolons from the main didn't feel terrible. There's only like 1 or 2 matchups where we actually actively wanted it in. That was the blue-white matchup. I think the rest of them you can take it or leave it against Infect. It's okay against the Prison deck, not great because they have a lot of spells that are 4 mana or more. So Eidolon, it's a solid card. It's been kind of a sacred cow in the main deck, and it's just possible with Storm kind of on the decline, or actually almost non-existent, and the Phoenix potentially on the decline, that you don't necessarily want it in the main deck. Something to look at as we play more games moving forward. As always, please consider subscribing, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below, and let me know what you think of this particular build about with Eidolons on the sideboard, lay up the stages in the main. Going to do some more experimenting throughout the next couple of weeks. A lot of things to try out before the London Mulligan rule hits the stage. So whether it's upping the counts on the Horizon Canopy lands, whether it's trying them on a red build, while it's trying the Wild Nakatl build that did pretty well in the Modern Challenge this past weekend. There's a whole lot of exciting stuff going on with Burn. Can't say I'm bored. There's a lot of stuff to do. So this has been John from MTG Nexus.